Buongiorno.
Salve, buonasera.
Buonasera, certo. Grazie per questo tempo, Carolyn. Allora, il nostro progetto brevemente si occupa di condivisione di conoscenza utilizzando i mezzi delle nuove tecnologie di connessione globale. Così questa conoscenza che noi condividiamo è sostenibile perché noi possiamo collegarci continuamente con tutto il mondo a costo zero e emissioni di CO2 praticamente nulle. E questa conoscenza che noi condividiamo attraverso queste conversazioni viene poi pubblicata sulla nostra piattaforma, che è un po' una piattaforma open source di conoscenza. Noi siamo collocati nel campus di Savona, il nostro è un progetto indipendente di ricerca sulla sostenibilità e la conservazione dell'arte contemporanea e il campus è un'eccellenza italiana per la ricerca sulla sostenibilità energetica, la Smart City. Comunque questo poi magari un giorno mi viene a trovare e le mostrerò.
Sì, un grande piacere.
Adesso parliamo di lei. Lei ha usato una parola bellissima quando sono venuta a vedere la presentazione della mostra di Giovanni Anselmo. Lei mi ha detto, per godere e comprendere questa mostra e la sua poeticità bisogna fare silenzio, non parlare. Si parla troppo. Poi questa è una parola, poeticità, che lei ha usato, che mi è piaciuta molto. Poi lei usa spesso nei suoi testi la parola conoscenza, che è un altro termine oggi controcorrente, perché c'è poco tempo per andare in profondità. E poi le ho chiesto, e quindi vorrei che cominciassimo a parlare a cominciare da questi due termini per comprendere il suo approccio al suo lavoro. And if you want, yes, of course you can use the English language.
Io quando uso poeticità non lo uso in un senso difficile e astruso. I just mean something that we feel as poetic, so related to poetry. So it's not about poiesis and going to the etymology of the word. It's a very simple feeling of a form of knowledge that cannot be constituted. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that I invoked silence, which is parallel to a decreased amount of visual stimuli in the exhibition. So a decreased amount of words and a decreased amount of visual stimuli as well in the Anselmo show. Now, of course, Giovanni Anselmo is an artist from the late 60s, so he's not a contemporary of new media or new technologies at all. And he certainly did not grow up as a digital native, nor, for that matter, is he particularly digitalized right now. But he does appreciate the fact that you can send a picture, like he goes in a second, as opposed to sending a photocolor, a slide, an Ektachrome, go to the post office, walk there, and so on. But he, of course, reminds everybody that although that's fantastic, if you're walking down the street with your cell phone, you should be careful because you might trip and fall, break your ankle. So that's a very simple summary of an old, wise person who's seen a lot of technological revolutions. I mean, what they saw, their generation, was the telephone being widely distributed and televisions widely distributed, although they only started in the mid-50s in Italy. But having seen quite a number of huge shifts, he does not fall into a naive, which I think is naive as well, having a mother who's an archaeologist, naive celebration of applied science. So when I say poetic, I don't mean La Poetica di Aristotele. I just mean something that refers to that particular kind of knowledge that is transmitted through words that are open floating signifiers, not defined rigidly, and that often have onomatopoeic points, so that there's a synesthesia between, let's say, different senses. Knowledge is an old word, but it's not that old a word. I mean, we speak about knowledge capitalism now, and we speak about cognitive capitalism, and they are used as synonyms since the 1990s. And we are also often talking about knowledge production. And the word production is, I think, key to the problem. So the problem being an overflow of information and of bits of information and overflow of stimuli in general, and a kind of naive idea that, I mean, in my view, naive idea that applied science is going to revolutionize the world. It will revolutionize the world, but not completely. There's certain things about our circadian cycles. I mean, I remember years ago in the 90s, people trying to make apps and software that would make the screen of your laptop slightly dimmer at night so that it would get you tired, or certain ions in the light would make you follow a kind of a body cycle so that you would get enough sleep. And of course, we know about the fact that those applications and software didn't actually work. Although everything that I'm saying to you sounds like I'm an anti-progress or technological progress, and that's not totally true. What I think is that there needs to be an alliance between the most ancient knowledges in the world and the most advanced research. That's what I think. And I do think, however, politically, I think politically quite a lot. And I never take things at face value. So I was listening to some of the video recordings that you've done and uploaded that I find fascinating. One with someone in Silicon Valley.
Yes, exactly. Yes, Orban.
That got me hooked on your thing. So I'm very, very interested in cutting edge and up-to-date research. I'm not against that, obviously. But I find that we repeat the same mistakes over and over again. And I find that art has a kind of skepticism when it's good art. There's a bit of a critique of one's society or the dominant trends in a society. And one of the dominant trends is that we are now in the era of knowledge production. And that the curatorial practice, what I do, let's say curators, has now extended to all fields. For example, biology, any genetic research will need curators. They have these curators and they do things that the computer can't do, which is reduce, let's say, to 3,000 cases. I mean, once it's been reduced automatically, a certain number of results of an experiment, of a test, statistically reduced with the right algorithms, then you have these people, and they're called curators, and they reduce it more and pull out certain things that they show to the so-called scientists. You know, I've seen this in labs across the world, from Vancouver to Vienna, because I do visit science labs quite a bit. Fundamental research in science labs. So I didn't quite answer you, but to summarize, I would say that I'm interested in knowledge, but I'm also interested in no-knowledge zones. First of all, we don't know what knowledge means. We don't exactly know. I mean, it doesn't really matter if we know, because even if we define it, words change their meanings constantly throughout time and different cultural contexts. So even if we pin it down to what it means today in Italy, it doesn't mean that tomorrow in London or in Dakar. So we don't even know what knowledge means. But if I know what you're trying to suggest, you're trying to suggest that it's an old word, that it implies a certain amount of synthesis of information, so that a kind of interiorization of how to react through free judgment and make choices as a human can occur. And that indeed is an old philosophical definition of knowledge, sapere, knowledge. I think that nowadays knowledge is identified often with who has the most, the most information, the most data, and the most useful tools to analyze the data. So that's not exactly knowledge in the old sense. But whether we're talking about the old sense or whether we're talking about the new sense, the problem with knowledge production is the production part. So I'm very close also to art and artists. I always have been. Arte povera, first of all, but let's say John Cage, to go further back, or artists of today like Pierre Huyghe, that speak about no knowledge zones, so that are in favor of zones of impossibility of constituted knowledge. And that's a reaction, it's a political reaction against, I think, what is a form of advanced capitalism, which is not necessarily at the service of joy. Another word I use a lot is flourishing, the flourishing life on the planet. I don't believe at all that we cannot feed the planet without GMOs. I think that's a lie, because all my journeys and all my travels around the world have shown me immense fields of GMO cotton or GMO corn for the purpose of making gas, energy, not for the purpose of feeding. And I know exactly what's the problem with GMOs in terms of the collapse of biodiversity. And so, I don't really trust that this technological revolution of the digital age is all for the good of humanity. I think that it's also to enslave humanity and to increase profit and to concentrate wealth. Although I understand that when you were speaking and introducing, and I suppose I could finish the first question here, you used the word sustainable quite a lot. That word 10 years ago I thought was okay, but right now I find the word very problematic, because sustainable usually means financially sustainable. That's what it usually means. A museum is not sustainable. There's not enough visitors and not enough tickets and money to turn it into a private enterprise. But who said museums should be a private enterprise and make profit or self-support themselves? Who said that? That's like contrary to the whole history of museums. Or who says that the medical services should all self-sustain themselves through insurance policies and simply, I don't think, in that sense, I'm not a communist, obviously, because that's an old vision of things which is based on human knowledge and human production, and it has a Stakhanovist principle to it. So it's just about how you share the profit, but it's not about, and ownership of means of production, but it's not about sharing the planet with all the other species. So I'm not a communist, but I certainly am worried about the collapse of a certain socialist perspective on how to run and how to apply things. I see a catastrophe in the universities with a kind of collapse of the humanities, or the interest in the humanities only for the purpose of the so-called knowledge production and, kind of matrix, like in the movie Matrix, slaves of producing producing information that will turn into entertainment. So the humanities are okay in this privatization only if they're directed to a kind of application, which is the application of leisure time.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I think about this whole thing. So I don't really use the term sustainable anymore.
Ma non la usavo in un punto di vista che per dire che se noi riusciamo con Radicate a coinvolgere nel progetto persone che sono basate in differenti parti del mondo grazie alle nuove tecnologie, senza le quali non avremo la possibilità economica di poter andare avanti in questo scambio di conoscenza. Mi spiego, io non posso fare...
Yes, no, I understand. No, I understand very well, and that's the other side to the coin. That's why I'm not against, obviously, the digital age. I mean, that's crazy. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to do any research at all in science or in humanity. I mean, it's an enormous contribution that revolutionized research in the humanities, because the thing is, what you're talking about, sharing knowledge is, it means that, you know, before there's somebody who knows A and somebody who knows B and somebody who knows C, and you need to study E. It was very hard to find out A, B, and C so that you could get to the point where you could study E. But now it's like it's in the last 10 years, basically, that this happened, or since the 15 years, since the early 90s. You have researchers in the humanities and in science all over the world who are connected, and they collaborate. And so you can get really quickly A, B, and C, and then you get to your thing, which is D or E. So yes, of course, I realize that it's not all bad. It's like saying the watch, you know, like when they invented the watch, let's say, after the sundial and all that, it wasn't a bad thing, because it, of course, helps us to tell the time. You know, the crystal, when you noticed what happened with crystals and how that affected movement inside something. And so, let's say or even before that, in just winding up the watch, let's say in the 1500s or 1600s, of course it's great. You know, we can make an appointment. But at the same time, with every technological advance, which is done for the purpose of a prosthetic device, you know, something that enhances one of our own abilities, like we can't calculate so fast, or we can't count so fast, so we make the calculator and so on. It's hard to tell what time of day it is exactly, so we get a watch. We invent watches. But at the same time as you make any invention, there is another thing which happens, which is a loss of ability. Some things atrophies. As you prosthesize, other things are atrophied. So my task in the world as a skeptic, because I am a skeptic, you know, like Sextus Empiricus, like Pirone the Great, I'm not old-fashioned, I'm just a skeptic. You know, and thank God there were skeptics throughout history. It's not that Montaigne was old-fashioned. Montaigne was a skeptic. Descartes was not, you know, but Friedrich Nietzsche was. I mean, the skeptics are also very useful because l'avvocato del diavolo, they play the devil's advocate, and they see the other side of things.
Yes, of course.
Right. So I just am observing what is the atrophization that is occurring at the same time as this prosthetic thing, which is that, yes, you and I can do this interview, and I can watch your interviews, which is great, and it has no huge cost. But as fast as we decrease the cost, if you study more holistically the whole economy, you notice that the faster we decrease costs, the faster we also lose jobs, and the faster we also impoverish certain areas of the world or certain parts of society.
È molto interessante quello che lei dice, che contraddice quello che diceva Orban, no? Lui parla della tecnologia esponenziale, che arriveremo a un momento in cui la tecnologia produrrà se stessa.
Ah sì, questo è vero.
Allora arriveremo a un punto in cui non ci sarà più l'uomo che lavora, ma solo la tecnologia, ci sarà la robotica che lavorerà al posto nostro, quindi probabilmente cambieranno i paradigmi e cambierà anche l'utilizzo del lavoro e sarà proprio un altro modo di vivere insieme.
Well, I think that's the ideas of the 1950s. Norbert Wiener and Gregory Bateson, they had this idea of cybernetics. Cybernetic means that the machine does it by itself, self-pilot, autopilota. So there was already in the 50s and 60s an incredible development of this exact same idea. And this exact same idea you can find in the 19th century when they invented the steam engine. But the point is that what I do becomes the work, But first of all, what I do, exhibitions, art, becomes work because we either die of boredom or we have to fill, our brain has to be constantly stimulated or we get sick, physically sick. So we're going to have a lot of leisure, and that means art. The creative industries are in the 21st century. They're the ones that are the most looked at to fill the time of people. And that's a lot of work, creative. For example, to take pictures of people, like selfies, take a selfie and then put it on Instagram or Facebook. It's a hell of a lot of work. I mean, you may not call it work, but it's a new kind of labor. It's the production of images, for example, that other people can aggregate around with I like, I don't like. Because what we call work just changes. And then the new work is not regulated politically. I mean, all the kids that are alienated with these, with the selfies, and it's not regulated work. So there's a hell of a lot of atrophization of things. Like when I said about the watch, we were no longer able, like so few people are able to look at the sky and say what time it is. So few people are able to make fire, so few people. So as soon as we have one prosthesis, we atrophize something. It's not our brain necessarily expands. It's that certain things get atrophied and we outsource. It's like outsourcing the brain. And it's dangerous, like the Google glasses, the thing that will take pictures of our whole life, atrophies the ability to select memories, for example. And there's a huge increase in attention deficit disorder in the young generations, ADD, huge, and there was a huge increase in anorexia 10 years ago. So, like say for example that little machine that flies, the drone, takes things to your doorstep. Of course that's progress, of course, but there's no legislation. I mean, I'm not, it's funny because it sounds like I'm against it. What I'm trying to say is that I am informed, I am aware that there are buttons and programs that you press on your washing machine and it automatically orders the soap and the soap gets delivered. But I think that the important thing is to realize that, number one, we are losing a kind of connection with the embodied, and so there are many other species on the planet that do not use the internet and cell phones, but their societies are being destroyed, like bees. The bees, there's more and more research that says that all these damn cell phones are causing the bee collapse of bee communities. I mean, it's not the only reason. There are many, many reasons. But bees, just as worms, are very important because without worms, there's no soil, and without soil, there's no agriculture. There's nothing to plant anything on, even with the best machine. And GMO fields are homogeneous. When that means that that's my dog, by the way.
Yeah.
Multi-species. Darcy, come here. Anyway, GMO fields are very susceptible to diseases because they're uniform, whereas a non-GMO field is not uniform, and therefore diseases will kill much less of the plants. But the question of capitalism is important. I mean, there's no reason why GMO seeds should be terminator seeds. There's no reason. They've been designed to be terminator seeds, which means that they cannot produce new seeds next year. It's not a necessity, it's a design, it's an intention. And what that means is that for the first time in 10,000 years, if GMOs were to be used all over the planet, and they're illegal in Italy, by the way, it means that it's the first time in 10,000 years that the human species, people do not control the means of production, as they used to say, of their own food. And that's dangerous because if the human species cannot make their own food, then if there's a financial crisis, as occurred actually in 2007 or 8, that year there was starvation on the planet and there was an overproduction of food. Hello?
The Skype call dropped, Caroline.
The laptop is complaining about what I'm saying.
Probably, yeah.
For example, I was in Tarakovsky's lab at Rockefeller University in New York, and he's in genetics, and he showed me that machine that it's to map the genome of each individual, actually. And that is going to make personalized medicine, right? So
yeah, personalized medicine, yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, of course, that's great. It's a great advancement. So I'm not against advancement in Western medicine, but most anybody who knows anything about the body nowadays is understanding how the combination of Western medicine with, say, yoga can bring to a much healthier lifestyle. And yoga is expanding all over the world. There are more and more people doing Kundalini yoga or yoga, and that connects the energy. It connects the so-called prana, the energy that you access through controlling of your breathing, which controls your mind, and your mind controls your breathing, and your breathing controls your mind. And you exercise certain parts of the body in a certain order, like from the bottom, your root chakra, all the way up to your crown chakra, your head, and it's like squeezing and turning things. Now, that sounds like magic or superstition, but it really isn't if we think in terms of other fields of science. And I'm specifically thinking about physics.
Yeah.
Not applied mathematics, not digital, but physics. Now, the most advanced physics is in quantum theory. It's always been in the last 40 years, but let's say you can't think physics without thinking quantum now. And we know very well, because those old ideas of observer dependency have been proven. Anton Zellinger, with his teleportation experiments, which really are not teleportation, it's just about entanglement, in the Canary Islands, and many other people have shown that it is true that on a small infinitesimal scale, the consciousness influences the result of the experiment. So if one scientist does the experiment, the result is different than if another scientist does it, or the same scientist in two different moments. And so there's two things he's been working on and they have been working on. One is entanglement, which is the fact that spooky action at a distance was what Einstein called it. And he said, we can't go that direction, because if we go there, we can go crazy, or we have to believe in God, which is silly. No point in believing in God. But entanglement means that two things that are very, very far on opposite ends of the universe are acting concertedly without any transmission of information via anything that we humans on planet Earth could call a transmission. So that's one thing that occurs. So there is something we really don't know that's going on, which makes the universe folded, and which makes all those theories of parallel universes, which I don't ascribe to, emerge. But it certainly tells us that time doesn't really exist in the way that we think it exists. So obviously, digital time, which is totally human-controlled synchronization, it's like the most banal and basic idea of time, so that the stock exchanges open at the same time and we can send messages at the same time. Those ideas of time are like, Età della Pietra, Stonehenge. And that's why they're doing a little bit of research in quantum computing also, because they're trying to figure out how to entangle things so that you don't have to encrypt anymore. You just have entangled elements that are larger than photons that can then make two computers communicate without any wireless connection or transmission of data. But that's maybe never going to happen, because it's one of those ideas like they had in the 60s, cybernetics. And we are really, really, really primitive compared to what we know about how the universe functions. So that's one thing, entanglement, and how little we know.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And the other side is the other point, which is on a small subatomic scale, you can certainly say that our thoughts are made of electrical charges and things, inversion of electrical potential when the sodium channels open and the neuron cells fire and synapse works and all that. But so on the one hand, we can say that our thoughts are also physical, certainly. And they're just as physical as a waterfall, but just on a small scale. And if that's true, telepathy is surely going to be proven very soon. And we know that people who do a lot of yoga and meditate, a lot of meditation, are very good at telepathy, because we don't know how it works, but it actually works. And it's probably connected with the physical nature of thoughts. And people like Annie Besant was writing books like Thought Forms, shortly before Einstein's theories in 1905, and they might prove very, very in advance. But not only are thoughts physical, and therefore they can be sent. We don't need all of this software, maybe. Not even implants under the skin.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you could say the opposite. I mean, there are so many scientists that say physics, that say that somehow the universe is produced by consciousness. So, if the universe is if consciousness affects the universe constantly, the universe can also somehow be a product of consciousness, like Twilight Zone. So, if that's true, well, we're in a scale of reflection that is so far beyond the people who are thinking in Silicon Valley of how we're going to run the planet. And so I do find that I am interested in science. I'm interested in fundamental research more than in applied science.
Allora io volevo chiederle per il Castello di Rivoli. Ho visto che la sua programmazione già adesso comprende anche conversazioni con figure diverse da quelle appunto del mondo dell'arte, quindi vedo che questo interesse suo per tutte le discipline è molto marcato. E allora mi piacerebbe che lei ci parlasse della sua visione per il suo programma per Rivoli Torino.
Adesso mi sono occupata negli ultimi 3 o 4 mesi di studiare la situazione e riflettere un pochino su cosa possa essere un museo nel futuro.
Cos'è un museo nel futuro?
Appunto, cioè adesso i musei stanno essendo tutti privatizzati quasi, cioè la scelta è stata andare nel vecchio museo pubblico, sebbene con sostegno di fondazioni bancarie naturalmente, però la scelta è stata chiara, perché quel che è nuovo, innovative nel mondo dell'arte sono la nascita delle fondazioni private, Vuitton, Garage, Pinot, Prada, e che stimo, stanno facendo un lavoro che compensa l'assenza del museo pubblico in certi versi, però per me sono un ritorno anche ad una oligarchia dell'arte un po' dove l'arte rappresenta status.
Sì, certamente, questo è chiaro, questo palazzo d'oro di Prada è proprio uno status.
Non è una critica ad un singolo individuo, è una osservazione dell'andamento verso una privatizzazione dei cosiddetti musei. Non è privatizzazione il problema, ma trasformazione della conoscenza in produzione di conoscenza.
Sì, come diceva prima.
Come dicevo prima. Forse, da un lato il museo può tornare a essere come il Museion di Alessandria d'Egitto, cioè il luogo delle muse, dove si produceva, dove si faceva ricerca e gli oggetti erano lì per ispirare i poeti, per l'appunto, perché era una parte della biblioteca, il Museion, il primo museo. Forse, insomma, ma non sono solo io che lo dico, che ci deve essere un'alleanza tra le università, gli istituti di ricerca e i musei per fare più lavoro insieme,
sì.
Fare voglio riprendere la biblioteca, sviluppare la biblioteca, forse fare dei luoghi dove le persone possono stare, vivere e restare, fare le loro ricerche, però è anche il luogo della memoria di che cos'è oggi, è una battaglia, c'è un campo di battaglia la cultura artistica, diciamo l'arte, sempre stato. Non è che esiste una cosa chiamata storia dell'arte e va avanti inesorabilmente, non è così, cioè ci sono persone sia nel Cinquecento che oggi che fanno delle scelte, questo sì e quello no, Janet Cardiff yes e Damien Hirst no, io.
Molto interessante, Carolyn. Cosa vuol dire campo di battaglia?
Vuol dire essere engagé nel creare quello che domani si dirà essere il XX secolo, la fine del XX secolo.
La selezione.
Non è solo la selezione, è proprio, cioè l'arte non esiste se non la fai esistere.
Chiaro, sì, certo.
Se non c'è la mostra non c'è l'opera. se non c'è documenta, non c'è il Untilled di Pierre Wig. So, ci deve essere il giardino, il parco dell'Auer Park, eccetera, eccetera, eccetera. E l'incontro fra un artista come Pierre Wig e me attorno al rapporto con i saperi non umani, per esempio, è stato un incontro, ma è grazie alla offerta di documenta che lui ha potuto fare Untilled, e Untilled ha aperto una enorme quantità di cose, no? Cioè, ho tutto documenta, dopo ci sono stati tutti incontri su the Anthropocene, you know, su percepire il pianeta in uno stato geologico chiamato Anthropocene. So all these things happened after. So things can take one turn or they can take a different turn. And it's not just the selecting and what is the memory that you want to remember this and not that. You know, it changes the course of things. It changes the course of history. So if I pull out Arte Povera now and put it in the collection, I'm speaking to, you know, new materialisms. I'm speaking to Duke University without doing it directly, but I am. I'm speaking to Karen Barad. I'm speaking to a certain number of things, and so you can see that after time. But it's really, yeah, it's just like art. It's a kind of challenge. But you know, I don't really think that art exists as a specific field, as you may know. I have been saying that it was invented in the 18th century, and then the past was read through that definition of modern Western bourgeoisie idea of what art is, which then is followed by the invention of art history, which is invented basically in the 19th century at the same time as photography. So there's no real art history in the sense that we ascribe to it, you know, the study of styles and movement and according to this idea of a historical development in relation to society or not in relation to society. All that is an idea that emerges with the association between historical parameters, the invention of something called art, and photography. So it's been around now for 200 years. I'm not sure that it will exist, you know, tomorrow. There will be different fields of aggregation of things. And, you know, maybe some people in Silicon Valley are sort of the artists, actually. If you think about it, YouTube, for example.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Case.
Yeah.
YouTube, yeah, it was invented by these two or three guys in 2006. They wanted to share videos to prepare parties. And they invented some software to upload videos more quickly. One of those two guys was an artist. You know, he studied art and he made bad paintings, but he invented YouTube. So art is not just invention. I mean, art is certainly connected with creativity, but it's also very much connected with critical consciousness, with skepticism.
Certo, e qui torniamo alla parola appunto scetticismo, che era quello con la quale abbiamo iniziato.
Sì, e forse con la quale possiamo concludere.